9 podcasts.
Shock, horror, perhaps tragedy. Your next Landcruiser 70 series won't be a V8. It could be a 2.8 litre turbo diesel 4-cylinder engine. This is the Drive Podcast. Welcome to the Drive Podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. Trent Nikolic and Sam Purcell with you. Sam, thank you for joining me, mate.
Always a pleasure, mate. Enjoying it.
Do you want to pretend you had something better to do? Or?
Listen, I was in the office and you gave me the tap on the shoulder.
Yep.
I thought, a little change of scenery doesn't hurt. I'll come over.
I'll do it. Yeah, exactly.
Give it a go. I'm surprised you've invited me back, actually.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Well, I was forced to. I was told by management, it came from on high, you need to get Purcell back in. We want to listen to his dulcet tones.
Okay, I'll take that.
I'm told, and you can confirm or deny this, but I'm told that, is it a meditation podcast where there is a guy that has a voice that sounds a lot like yours?
I've heard about this guy and I've heard his voice. It is pretty similar.
Do you listen to it and think, that does sound a bit like me?
It is a bit unnerving.
Do you feel relaxed when you listen to your own voice?
No. When you listen to yourself, it's just strange.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now you know how I feel. Mate, as we always do, let's start off with what we're currently driving. I know what you've been driving, as I would, but the listeners don't. So why don't you tell them what you've been driving?
I've been in an interesting little car, actually. It's a Suzuki S-Cross, which has been updated. It's one of these old bones but sort of heavily updated models, and it's a good car. So the elevator pitch for that thing is 1.4 litre turbo, a bit of power, a bit of torque, good gearbox, really, really good all-wheel drive system, pretty big boot. But the price tag is a bit big also. It's like $44,000 plus on roads.
You know what I find intriguing? There's a line of questioning, I guess, at the moment, and we get asked this a lot. You know, people are looking to buy a new vehicle. They ask this question a lot.
Yep.
Is the engine underpowered? Is it too small? Right?
Yeah.
Is it too little? What I actually like about Suzuki's methodology, and I can put my hand up here, this is someone who owns a Suzuki that's got an engine of less than a litre, an 800cc. As you
love
know.
the minus
glorified
at the moment.
Yeah, that's right, glorified motorcycle engine. The thing that I think is interesting about Suzuki as a case study is that they've been building small engines for a long time.
Yeah.
They're iconic cars. If you go back to the mid-90s, their Swift GTI had a 1.3 litre naturally aspirated engine, right? They've got a lot of motorcycle technology in the way that they can develop things. So I think you might look at it on paper and think, 1.4, not big enough.
It's a bit on the small side, right?
No, correct.
But it does
make
torque in the right places, I suppose. So it feels pretty responsive the way they've got it all tuned. It kind of feels like a small Forester XT, I suppose. That was more of a mid-size SUV. This thing's a bit smaller, but, turbocharged, bit of power, bit of response. Just when you want to overtake someone, you've got a bit of stuff in the boot, you can do it a bit more confidently,
Get it done.
And it's a bit more fun to drive, which I think is important. It's a bit more engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to leave everybody on a cliffhanger because what I've been driving the last couple of days, I'm not allowed to tell you anything about. Well, I can tell you what I've been driving. It's the all-new Volkswagen Amarok.
Yes.
Which you've driven.
Yes,
in South Africa.
Not in Australia, not on Australian roads.
Correct.
So I can't speak to that sort of stuff, but I've got a bit of an idea about it.
Yeah, you drove it in South Africa. It's built in South Africa. Interestingly enough, speaking to the Volkswagen executives, the fact it's built in South Africa is going to be a bonus for them in terms of securing supply.
Yeah.
So from factory to Australia is about 3 weeks, right? Okay. As opposed to shipping it either from Asia or from other parts of Europe or from South America, for argument's sake, where the Amarok used to come from. So supply is a lot easier, let's put it that way, for them, a lot less affected by some shipping issues that, other manufacturers have had. So it's a positive for Volkswagen that now that the vehicle's officially released in the next week, or now you can go into a dealer and get one, they'll actually be able to get them.
They'll have decent supply. And I'm sure that a lot of people who are waiting for a Ranger, especially high-spec ones, Wild Track, Raptor maybe, XLT, that new Platinum model, they might look over at the Volkswagen dealership and go, one of those is right there now. I might just sort of
don't have to wait 8 months.
Jump over and have a look.
We spoke about that with Isuzu D-Max and BT50, right?
Yes.
Because Isuzu released an all-new ute, went straight to the top of the segment, then couldn't get enough stock.
Yeah, no.
So are you going to a Mazda
kind of shooting
dealer?
yourself in the foot because I'm sure
100%.
you're turning people away a little bit. People get a bit cranky. You want this ute. You want that new model. You're excited.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, sir. It's going to be a 9-month wait.
Yeah, you just wait.
Yeah. It's a bit annoying, right?
You've been waiting 5 or 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
Just wait a bit longer.
You've probably had an old D-Max for 10 years or something like that, you know?
Now, the reason I can't tell you about the Amarok is because the driving impressions embargo is Thursday this week. So, but in the next couple of days, if you go to Drive.com.au, there'll be a full review. There'll be video. In the meantime, they can go and have a look at your content from South Africa.
Yeah.
And we will talk about some things related to the Amarok in a minute.
There are some interesting parts of that, not the review side of
Yep.
it, but the way that car sits, I suppose, in such an important part of the Australian automotive landscape and how Volkswagen have tickled things around for
I
their
think
own
so
purposes.
too. Absolutely. So we'll get into that in a minute. Getting into the news of the week, and I referenced this at the start of the podcast.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, well, if you're close to a city, it's one thing. If you're listening to this podcast west of the Great Dividing Range, take a seat in a comfy armchair.
Yes.
Somewhere where there's no sharp objects that you're going to fall over and land on. Perhaps get a glass of water, because it would appear from some investigation that we've done, although we weren't initially sure how reliable the information was, it would appear that the Toyota Landcruiser 70 Series, yes, the boxy retro old schooler, is going to live on with a V8 for the moment.
Yes.
But it's going to be sold alongside a 2.8 litre turbo diesel 4-cylinder, which you're familiar with from Hilux, Fortuner and Prado.
Yep.
And then eventually, when the emissions gods strike down upon
when they swing that hammer.
when they swing the hammer, the V8 will go and it'll be 4-cylinder only.
Yeah, and it might be only a couple of years too. We're not sure exactly how long that V8 is going to be sticking around, but
And the good news is they've only got, a 10-year waiting list, I
that's
think,
right.
now for
That's
a V8,
right.
so you'll be
Yeah.
right. You'll
Yeah.
get one.
There's going to be a lot of heartbroken Australians.
Good luck with that.
On the waiting list for a V8.
Heartbroken Australians and blokes with a 5-year-old one with 250,000 Ks going, mine's worth $250,000.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a ridiculous amount
And
of
they'll
money.
probably sell for that too.
The question is, it's not so much whether this will work, because I think, and again, this is, I know I say this a lot, but this is a question I get asked a lot on any of the radio segments that we do. People are ringing in saying, I've got a 70 Series. If they discontinue it or if they change the engine, what do I buy?
Yep.
Now, you and I thrashed this out in the office last week when we were talking about this. This for me, with the 4-cylinder versus the V8, is very much a 300 series versus 200 series argument in that on paper, the 4-cylinder is excellent.
It's got better peak power and peak torque, right? It's 500 newton meters. They can pull 550 out of it with that new GR Sport.
Correct.
Hilux.
In a 2.8 litre 4 as opposed to a 4.5 litre 8. The issue is that for a lot of people out there in the bush, now I would argue, say you're chugging along with 1,000 kilos of spraying equipment on a rural property at 10 Ks an hour, I would argue that a V8 probably does it easier.
It does.
Right?
Absolutely.
And this is the issue. I think what we're starting to see with a lot of these moves towards more efficient technology, which we all agree we have to embrace and we have to do something about it. There's no doubt about that. However, on paper, performance doesn't necessarily translate to the real world.
Not always, not always. The thing you got to look at, especially with that engine, I think, is peak torque. How much torque is developed and where in the revs that is made. So, I mean, I've been driving that Landcruiser now on and off in some pretty cool places. Simpson Desert with you.
Well, yeah, I said to someone the other day, we drove one across the Simpson. So we got a fair idea of where they're good, bad, where they struggle and don't struggle.
Yeah. What I loved about that car, that thing was loaded up with fuel, water, gear, all sorts of stuff. And you could stop halfway up a sand dune.
Correct.
And you could just sit there, put it in first gear, drop the clutch, and the wheels spin. It does not stall. It's like a old school anti-stall.
Could you deliberately bog it halfway up a sand dune?
It's been alleged. You could. I'm not sure who confirmed that or not. But,
I wasn't there. I don't know what you're talking about.
You'd have to watch the video for that to see the faux bogging. But
how much weight do you reckon we had in it?
There was a fair bit on there and all over the back axle, right in an area, a lot of it behind the back axle actually, where you don't want it. But it would have been probably, I don't know, it would have been 600 or 700 kilos or something like that. And something you definitely feel. The suspension isn't necessarily that good on a 70 Series Land Cruiser. There's something they should update.
Yeah.
It should be the suspension. Leave the engine alone if you can, because that V8, people, old cockies will really, really miss that thing. And
they will.
The other side of it will be the guys who tune them up to the razoo, because they can pull huge numbers of power and torque out of the engine because it's under stress. Correct. You can't do that with the 2.8.
Yeah.
It's progress, I suppose, isn't it? What do you do?
I think that is the argument that you just made there too, where it's under stressed. It's easy in the city to forget that a lot of these vehicles, when you go out bush like we've done multiple times, not only do you rarely see anything that doesn't have a Toyota badge on it. And we joke about this, especially when you get out into the really remote areas. Out there, it's hot as hell. It's dusty. When it rains, it's drenching rain, like awful conditions. If it's really muddy, it's properly really muddy.
Yeah.
They go with the real extremes of the weather. Now, the benefit of having a powertrain that is under stressed when it's got to work in that environment cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
That's the point, right?
But can I also ask you, what's your opinion on the performance of the 70 Series Landcruiser, fully loaded, trying to accelerate from 80 k's an hour to 120 in a headwind? So I think it's pretty woeful.
I think, having experienced that going up a hill in outback Queensland multiple times after we got across the Simpson, I would argue that it has a similar response to my 800cc Suzuki, which is it almost starts to go backwards.
Glacial.
It's not
open
good.
Your calendar and book in the overtaking.
It's not good.
Yeah.
I said to someone the other day, if you get out of a 70 series and into a 200, it doesn't feel like the 200's got an extra turbo. It feels like it's got an extra 2 turbos, 4 cylinders, and about 5 litres on it. It's crazy.
And you just plant the pedal and go, right?
Yeah.
It's gearing. It's a lot of things going on there. But
crazy.
as good as the 70 series is from a crawl, as bad as it is at highway speeds.
Yeah, absolutely. You're listening to Sam and Trent's Greatest Hits on the golden era of radio. No, look, seriously, I think we need to accept that, the 70 Series V8 is going to be a thing of the past. Yeah. Look, all we can say is if you want one of them, get on a waiting list now. Accost your local Toyota dealer.
And make friends with the bank manager as well, because you're going to be asking for some dollary dues.
You're going to need deep pockets.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there it is. The full story on that's over at Drive.com.au, as with everything we're talking about on the podcast today. Moving right along to Volkswagen Amarok. Now, again, under the threat of death or torture, at best. I'm not going to give you any driving impressions. Couple of interesting facts about the new Amarok. I spoke to the head of their commercial vehicle division in Australia, Ryan Davies, and he told us, this is quote, the most pre-sale interest we've had on any Volkswagen model in history in Australia.
Really?
So keep in mind, that's a brand that sells Polo, Golf. Passat, Tiguan, Touareg, T-Roc, T-Cross now. Something like the Sirocco that came out here to massive fanfare when it was launched, because we'd never had it in this market.
GTIs, Golf
Rs, all of that stuff. Yeah. This, a humble dual cab, right? You reckon Australians like them? A humble dual cab has had more interest than any other Volkswagen model in history. They've got more than 12,000 expressions of interest at the time of launch when I drove it. Now, they don't all translate to sales. However, they're tipping they're going to sell 8,000 of them this year.
Jeez, it's good volume.
So if you extrapolate that out once demand tails off a little bit, that's probably between 12 or 13,000 a year. Which would far and away make it their most popular model in Australia.
And in comparison to the old Amarok, which we always talk about being such a great car, didn't really sell in massive numbers. I mean, we were talking about the 70 before. The 70 Series Landcruiser, old, overpriced, all those things, often outsold the Amarok, which had great power, great torque, great powertrain, beautiful cabin, road handled really well.
That's right.
Bit of old tech and that sort of thing. But I mean, it speaks to the Australian market, right? Like we've really got a thing for these cars.
Unbelievable. We looked at the numbers. So Amarok was the brand's top-selling vehicle in Australia in 2021. So it has happened before, right? It topped the sales charts for them here in 21. Sales slowed in 22 as that model reached the end of its life cycle. Supply was a bit of an issue, all that sort of stuff. And as I said, 8,000 this year, based on the timing of the release. Annual target's going to be 10,000 plus. And what I thought was really interesting that Ryan Davies said to us, and again, I'll remind you that he's the head of commercial vehicles in Australia for Volkswagen. He said the annual target's 10,000 plus, and in this market, that is only 5% still of the market share. Yeah. The question we will be asking ourselves is, why can't we go higher? Now, That's really interesting, I think, because do you, if you're looking at a Volkswagen Tiguan or Touareg as a default daily driver, potentially to have the kids and the family in it over the weekend, do you have a look at an Amarok?
Do you change across? I suppose it's an interesting one. Are they looking at getting people from the old Amarok into the new one? Are they looking to get people from a Ranger into an Amarok, or Navara, Triton, Hilux, all these things? Or are they conquesting from other areas?
Okay.
I suppose medium-sized SUV is where you go to try and pull those people in, because this thing's got tech, it's got the Volkswagen badge, it's got nice power and torque, all those sorts of things.
Let's answer those questions in order, if I can remember the order that you just gave me.
Just fired off a few, sorry.
Existing Amarok owners, that will be key. Will they be able to attract Ranger buyers? Really interesting point. There'll be a percentage of Ranger buyers who wouldn't even look at an Amarok because it's got a Volkswagen badge on it. They want a Ford. However, as good as the Ford is, and we know that it's at the top of the segment everywhere, if you put Raptor to one side, Amarok's going to slug it out with Ranger almost spec for spec. That's the first one. And this answers the last part, Navara and Hilux and all the rest of them. I think Hilux stands apart because it's been a long time since Hilux has been the best in the segment. Hell of a long time.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
And it still sells. However, the rest of the dual cab field, given the Ranger is the best of the segment, the Amarok is based on the Ranger, Volkswagen would need to do something pretty stupid to make the Amarok worse than the Ranger, which means you'd be silly not to consider it if you're looking at the other brands and you want something that is up at the top of the segment, right?
Yeah. And there are going to be some people who are waiting for a Ranger, and this Amarok's going to be there, and they'll probably think, okay, well, if supply's better, they can get one faster because this thing is made in South Africa. It's not made in Thailand, where there might be some bottleneck issues, that sort of thing. You might be able to get into one sooner. Hey, why not?
I tell you one thing I have written in my review, which has got nothing to do with driving impressions. If you, outside of Raptor, if you park Ranger next to Amarok spec for spec and say to me, you've only got to buy one. You can only buy one. I'd buy the Volkswagen. I really like the look of it. I think from the minute we saw the images of it, you drove it overseas, we had a good look at the style, really liked the style of it. I think the fact that there are a bunch of things that Volkswagen's changed, I think makes it feel Volkswagen enough, in inverted commas for me.
I agree.
You know, inside the cabin and the design and the look and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's a factor as well. And I like the fact it's a Volkswagen. I always liked the fact that the Amarok was a little bit different, sat outside the rest of them a little bit. So for me, I think I would do that. Now, would other people, if you're not a rusted-on Ford fan and you're looking at it because you've read the reviews, it's the best in the segment, it's got all the gear you want, do you go across the road to the Volkswagen dealer and go, well, I don't have to wait 8 months, 6 months, whatever it is?
You should probably consider, I think, because the important thing to note here is that that car is a bit different. Like if you do D-Max versus BT50, those cars are like very, very, very similar. The Amarok and the Ranger, they're a bit more different. Same bits, right? But it's a different cook. So it's just come out of the kitchen a little bit differently, I suppose, is an easy way to sort of sum it up. It is a different feeling car, and it is a different car. I think it's easy to say that.
Just the last thing we'll look at on the Amarok before we take a break. We spoke to them about this, and they're aware that we see this as something they need to work on. They've defended the fact that entry-level versions of the new Amarok lack key safety tech that's standard on more affordable older models. Rear cross traffic alert and blind zone warning are standard on all variants of the new Ford Ranger, Isuzu D-Max and Mazda BT50, from the most affordable to the most expensive. That technology is not standard right across the new Amarok range. It's not on the two most affordable variants. So let me be very clear. So that's Core and Core Automatic, manual and auto. Core Automatic is $52,990 plus on roads. If you want the tech, you step up to Life, which is $56,990 plus on roads. Now, that's $1,000 more affordable than what an equivalent model in the old range would have been. So that's a good thing. But yeah, I think it's something that Volkswagen will certainly, I would assume, look at when they come to, minor update time. Now, there could be a bunch of different reasons for it, probably to do, I would say, with semiconductor issues.
Yeah, maybe.
Right?
I would say maybe they're probably thinking that, and they're probably correct as well, that they're going to be selling a lot of high-spec ones and they're not going to be selling many base-spec ones because fleet buyers are probably going to look at something that's going to be a cheaper thing to buy that's going to have that tech. So Volkswagen's not even going to be on
not even going to get a look in.
Consideration set,
fair point.
You know what I mean? Who's going to be buying that car? It's going to be, I don't know, just a price leader, I guess. And everyone's going to be leaning up towards the top. Does that justify doing it? Probably not. You'd like to see that tech on every model, I think, because it's pretty important stuff to have. But at the same time, this is a premium brand in a segment that, as we've seen, they charge more and more and more money for these things, and people keep buying them. It's a premium thing. It's an aspirational thing. It's prestige, I suppose you could say. They're going to focus on that end of the market mostly, I think.
I think it's worth making the point too in Volkswagen's defence that Nathan Johnson, who's their head of product planning for the commercial vehicle segment within the Volkswagen brand, told us at launch that blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert are under review for next year's Amarok update. So that we're evaluating everything for MY24. It's something we need to speak to the factory about. So I think, like we used to say back in the old days when the Amarok didn't have rear airbags, the Australian arm was constantly saying to head office, put them in. That I would assume with this, they're going to be able to get that over the line because it's a lot easier to do than airbags. Right?
I think they'll probably see the news story and forward that on to some engineers and say, hello, can we please have this as soon as we can? Thank you.
Absolutely. Look, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to have a bit of a chat about some interesting words from Toyota Australia, talking about an electric-only policy that might leave ute and four-wheel drive owners behind. All that after the break. Welcome back to the Drive Podcast. Trent Nikolic and Sam Purcell with you. Sam, on one hand, I liked this story when I saw it, but I also understand where Toyota's coming from. It's really quite interesting. We'll get to the story in a sec. Really quite interesting. I wrote an opinion piece that I think a few weeks ago that I think Volvo, which is going fully electric 2026, 4 years before they do it globally, they're doing it in Australia. Really good move on Volvo's part. I think it's going to work for them. Conversely, I wrote that Toyota being a little bit hesitant to go down that road.
Yes, it's slower on the uptake.
Slow on the uptake, I think will work for them and I think is equally smart for their own reason. Now, post my opinion piece on that, Toyota Australia's warned that a simplistic electric-only policy would leave ute and four-wheel drive owners behind. Now, some of you out there, especially if you're listening in a more rural area or semi-rural area, are going, duh. But let me tell you that people in the city who are running around just thinking that electric vehicles are going to save the world, full stop, are forgetting that there are people who live a little bit further away from a major city than they do. And as I keep saying, there are situations where people are going to struggle to use an electric vehicle for a whole range of things for a hell of a long time until we sort out a whole bunch of technology.
It's going to take a while for the tech to catch up, I think. And the point is just really pragmatic. If you tow a lot, if you load up your vehicle with a lot of stuff, you drive in hard conditions, up heavy, steep hills with a heavy load, hot ambience, cold ambient temperatures, whatever it is, going off-road a bit, whether that's for work or just recreationally, electric cars aren't there yet. And I don't know when they will be. I mean, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, it might be, who knows, right? And there's going to be a need for vehicles that Toyota makes, right? We've been talking about Landcruiser a bit earlier. It's vehicles exactly like that, that are bedrock for a lot of people's uses. That's not going to be going electric anytime soon because the tech just isn't there yet.
I used to call electric vehicle evangelists the Teslarati because Tesla is where it was started. But it's funny that evangelist starts with EV. It's brilliant for this current argument. It's just perfect. It's serendipity of the highest order. I had a conversation with someone who is an evangelist the other day, and I said, last year we drove 2 Toyotas across the Simpson Desert. Such is the remoteness of the journey, we took jerry cans with diesel because we wanted to make sure we had enough conventional fuel to get across the Simpson Desert. I also mentioned that old mate with his wife and kids who was out there with the damaged chassis in his four-wheel drive a couple of weeks ago, took 5 days, let me repeat that, 5 days for help to get to him to get him out of there. Australia's quite remote. I said to this evangelist, where will that work with an electric vehicle? Well, if you put 11 million solar panels at Mount Dare, which is on the western side of the Simpson Desert, and there's a fast charger in Birdsville on the other side, and you had battery storage at Mount Dare, keep in mind Mount Dare petrol stations run off a diesel generator.
It is.
If you put 11 million solar panels and a battery out there, you could charge your electric vehicle and in theory get across the Simpson Desert.
In theory.
In theory. We love theories,
Yeah.
right? Now, that's presuming that electric cars don't break down, don't divert, don't go off course for a couple of 100 Ks to explore, take the quickest, smartest, easiest way across, you don't have any issues, et cetera, et cetera.
Don't get bogged too much.
Also, just quite a simple question, who's going to pay to build that power generation out there? And if it was easy, wouldn't it have already been done? Because wouldn't a battery pack that runs a petrol station be better than a diesel generator anyway? If it was that easy?
I doubt old mate Graham at Mount Dare would be putting his hand in his own pocket for a gigantic battery pack.
Exactly. So I think when you are out in these remote areas, this is not necessarily an opinion. It's not necessarily my opinion. I think if we're in the midst of the industry and talking to engineers and we can't give you a date on when it's going to make sense for people in remote areas, I fail to see how someone in a government office in the city has got any clue.
Yeah, the cars might be great, but the infrastructure needs to catch up as well. And it just needs to be robust and proven and cost effective. And that's something, they might be robust actually, electric cars, but proven, not yet so much. Cost effective, well,
absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
No.
You know, there's a big weight penalty that comes with them. There's, you know, all sorts of things that you need to get your head around at the moment. Maybe when tech gets there might be some amazing breakthrough of some kind of battery in a few years and it'll change everything. When that comes, okay, sure. But at the moment, you kind of need to play the card you dealt. You know, old mate driving around town, electric cars there.
Sure.
And we can convert a huge amount of our global fleet or national fleet to electric.
Sure.
But
of course we can.
Not everything though.
Absolutely. As always, as we always say, the solution is somewhere in the middle.
It is.
But I think at either extreme, whether it's we must drive diesel vehicles forever and ever, amen, or you can only drive an electric vehicle, the sensible people in the middle get left behind. The point you just made there is spot on. For you and me and the average Aussie who lives 20 to 30 Ks from work, we can all drive electric vehicles. Once they're affordable, we can all drive them. However, it's not stupid or extremist to say there are people who can't charge them, there are people who have issues with charging, people who don't have off-street parking, people who live in rental properties, people who can't necessarily afford an EV now or afford the infrastructure. We need to work through all of those
There's
things.
just people like myself who just love to go camping and forward driving. They might have a fishing spot that's 200 Ks down a dirt road and, you know, they might only do that once a month. But that's what they want to do with their car. An electric car can't do it. So who am I to tell them that they can't do that anymore?
That's exactly
what
right,
I mean?
yeah. And those, I think they're the people that Toyota's referring to that get left behind. Toyota's going to cop a lot of stick for this.
They already have.
We'll probably cop a lot of stick.
Right?
Maybe. For supporting the argument. But I think it's an argument that needs to be made.
It's not a black or white thing, right? Like you said.
Shades.
Yeah.
Definitely shades of grey, absolutely. Let's take a look at a couple of cars that we have reviewed. One of them's a real enthusiast car, which we'll get to in a second. But one is a car that you drove. I think we were going to drive it overseas and then we ended up driving it here. And it's a really, really interesting case study.
That was the Mahindra, the new Mahindra Scorpio. So it's not a Scorpio N like it was initially going to be called. There's a few funny things going on, but it's called the Scorpio. It's a large SUV, but it's a little bit smaller than others. So consider like a Toyota Fortuner size, I suppose. 4-wheel drive, turbo diesel, 6-seater, 7-seaters coming in the future, but it's a pretty cost-effective way to get all of those things in a new car because it's priced from $42,000 drive away or $44,000 drive away. So that's a lot cheaper than most other guys in that segment. I mean, a Ford Everest starts from, I think, 55, right? A lot more expensive.
Right?
Yeah, so it's a car that has some things going for it, but it's also got some shortcomings. And it's the main one for me is safety, right? It's just not a very safe vehicle in comparison to others in terms of modern safety tech. Hasn't been crash tested by ANCAP yet. So there's a bit of a question mark there.
Is there a plan for that to happen?
Apparently there is.
Yeah, okay.
So some of the guys who know this stuff a lot more than I in the office gave me the nudge, and cars need to have autonomous braking by March 2025. So by the time that date rolls around, the Scorpio needs to have it or it can't be sold anymore. So their hands are tied. They're going to have to do it, right? So it'll turn up by that stage, and I imagine that around that time they're probably going to crash test it then because it will score better. So we'll see how it performs in a crash test, how it folds up, how it protects the occupants. We'll get a better idea of the bones of the vehicle at that stage, I guess, and how it compares to other vehicles. Otherwise, it's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing.
I'll tell you what fascinates me the most about Mahindra. It'd be, let's call it 8 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that. Actually, yeah, it might even be 10 years ago now. I went over to India. I went to Mumbai, and then their factory, I think, is about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive out of Mumbai.
Okay.
I forget the name of the town that the factory's in. A mega factory and unbelievable technology out there, right? Now, that was when they launched the XUV 500.
Okay, yep.
And we spoke to, I think not the absolute head of the company, but 2IC, effectively. And the question I asked him was, with all due respect, and I didn't mean this to sound disrespectful, you've got, at the time, the second most populous nation on earth to sell this vehicle to.
Yep.
And they already had a waiting list for it. I think they had like 40,000 orders for it.
Yeah.
Right? You're selling to that audience already with an enormous order bank.
Yeah.
Why do you even care about a tiny little market like Australia?
That's a fair point.
And their answer is, as a company, we see ourselves as wanting to succeed in some of the big ticket markets around the world, particularly right-hand drive markets. And Australia is one of them, especially when it comes to SUVs, four-wheel drives, rugged off-roaders. And on one hand, you know, Australians say, I wouldn't want an Indian car. I don't know how well built they are or whatever. Trust me, you could not treat a car in this country the way the Indians treat their cars over there. They get hammered when they use them, especially anywhere off-road.
Yep.
And their road network's awful, and poor road surfaces and extremes of weather and lots of dirt roads, unsealed roads.
They don't seem to care much about GVMs either. They'll just load the thing up until it's full.
Load the hell out of it. So they hammer their cars. So the fact that they're robust really, you know.
It comes with the territory, right?
Yeah. If you said to me, I'm going to bomb across the Simpson in a Mahindra pickup, I'd say no problem. You'll make it, no issue. So I understand that, you know, the vehicles are pretty well built and they want to succeed in this market, but I still don't get why they want to do that. I just think Australia is such a tiny little market for them globally.
We're a competitive and picky market as well. I mean, we've sort of been
a lot of options,
not tearing shreds off them, but pointing out wherever we can the safety shortcomings of that car. And it's
we should.
It's a expensive thing to fix. It's a complicated thing to fix. All that technology is very complex. You know what I mean? And they can sell a lot of cars without it in other markets and do well for themselves. So the question is why? I suppose they want to go up against some of the mainstream players, and they want to conquest and take it on. And I think they'll do reasonably well. But the one to consider, if you're thinking about the Mahindra, also consider the SsangYong Rexton.
SsangYong Rexton, absolutely.
Because
we've said this with the SsangYong Ute.
Yeah, the Musso. The Musso is a great Ute. I jumped in that a little while ago.
Completely underrated.
And you get out of it and you're like, oh, okay, what are the good things? And you ring them all off. And then you're like, what are the bad things? You're like, oh, there's not
really.
many.
Yeah,
exactly. It's a good car.
Yep.
And the Rexton is the same thing. It's competitively priced. It's got a better towing capacity than the Mahindra. And it's also got a little bit more space, I think, but that's not a straight comparison. But it's an important area to compete in, I think. And once that safety gets up there a little bit more for the Mahindra, it'll be a nice, solid option.
Absolutely. If you're on a budget, check it out, Drive.com.au. Now, quickly before we wrap up, mate, from the sublime to the ridiculous, or maybe the ridiculous to the sublime, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
From the Mahindra to the 2023 Toyota GR Corolla.
Oh, yeah.
GR for Gazoo Racing, which means Racing Garage, effectively, in English. Now, I had a chance to drive this. Rob Margate reviewed it. You and I spent a bit of time in it. We looked at it in the office. We have had a bit of time to dissect this car.
Yep.
It's not cheap. Let's make that point, right? It is not a cheap car. It's going to cost you, drive-away price indicative is about $67,000.
A lot of money for a Corolla.
In Sydney. A lot of money for Corolla. But this is a hell of a lot of Corolla. That's the point to make.
That's the flip side.
And I love the fact that Toyota's said, in the dying days, I guess, of what we see as classic internal combustion, they've put their hand up and said, we're going to have a crack at giving people who want a hot hatch something to remember.
Yep.
And this GR Corolla is a belter of a car. It's awesome to drive. It's awesome to look at. The engine's a cracker. Just everything about it is really impressive.
It's amazing how much of a legendary name that little 3-cylinder engine has already built in a short amount of time. It's been in the Yaris, now it's in the Corolla. People are just raving about that engine for its flexibility. I think people are tuning them up even as well a little bit. And,
already. 1.6 litre, 3-cylinder. It's making 221 kilowatts, 370 Newton meters, 6-speed manual. Permanent all-wheel drive.
Manual only.
Remember that.
How about that, hey? In these day and age, for a car maker to do a manual-only car, and then it sells out. I'm sort of glad that they did it because, everyone's like, oh, they want an automatic, and no, this, and no, that. Toyota have sort of listened to some of the diehard enthusiasts.
Yeah, 100% they have.
But I'm really glad that those enthusiasts have actually fronted up with some money and they're buying the thing.
Yeah, because you can't get one effectively. It's pretty much sold out. What for me is the big ticket item here, when the Yaris GR came out, I drove it and went, how good is this? This thing's unbelievable. But I'd get out of it, close the door, take 10 steps and look back at it and just go, no, I don't want one. I couldn't buy one. Now, I know people...
Just too small?
Too small, looked a little bit funky.
Yeah.
Because it's such a short wheelbase, it looked quite tall.
And the wheels are almost like hanging out the back.
Yeah, the proportion, the way the wheel arches are, the proportions were a little bit weird. Now, I know a couple of people who've bought them and they love them. You couldn't pry it out of them, right?
Yep.
I get that, but I kept looking at it thinking, as good as this is, I couldn't buy one. I could absolutely, in a heartbeat, buy this Corolla. I could live with it every day. I could drive it every day. It's fantastic whether you're in traffic or on a twisty road on a Sunday morning with no one on it. I think it looks great. The proportions are right. And what they've done with it in a design sense, it just looks tough as nails.
Yeah. I appreciate the fact that they haven't over-egged it in terms of the everyday driving, right? It's a bit of a weapon, right? It loves being driven hard, but you can live with this thing day to day. If you've got a bit of a taste for that thing, it's not going to ride like a Rolls Royce or anything, right? But it's going to, it's good enough in that respect, which is important.
Yeah, awesome car. If you want to have a look at the full review, go to drive.com.au. As I said, Rob's reviewed it. We've thrashed it out and had a good look at it. We love the car. It's one of those ones I didn't want to hand back. It's funny. Someone said to me the other day, in the last 12 months, what are the two cars that really stand out to you? One of them was the Land Rover Defender. Every time I've driven a Defender, I've just thought, this thing is sensational.
It's an impressive car.
It really is. And the other one was the GR Corolla. It's that one car I would absolutely put my own money down for. Go to drive.com.au if you want to have a look at that. 3-cylinder Corollas, 4-cylinder Landcruisers. We've covered it all today.
I know. I'm glad we spoke about something that wasn't a ute or a four-wheel drive there.
It's true,
it was.
We had to throw it in. We just slide it in at the end that we do test drive things that aren't dual cabs or four-wheel drive. Sam, thank you for joining me, mate.
Always a pleasure, mate.
Thank you for listening. And don't forget, everything that we've spoken about on the podcast, all the other testing we do, that's over at drive.com.au. And we will see you again. We'll talk to you again next week for The Drive.